The Edmonton Oilers, much like a college student, are getting their work done late on a Sunday night.
You are Locked On Oilers, your daily podcast on the Edmonton Oilers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this very late Sunday night, early Monday morning edition of Locked On Oilers. I am your host, Nick Zararis. I want to thank everybody who's making Locked On Oilers the first listen of their Monday. Locked On Oilers, a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And let's get into the goods. So, originally, this episode, Monday's episode, was going to be just about the trade that was earlier in the day. The Oilers trading a fourth-round pick for Vasily Podkolzin of the Canucks. And then I was getting ready to go take a shower, wash my face, get ready to go to sleep, and I get the little boop notification on Twitter that from @Oilers have completed a trade with the San Jose Sharks. So we're going to start with the trades themselves, the logic, etc. Then the second segment, we're going to get into the context of the trades, why you make the trades. And then our final segment, we are going to tackle what happens next. So at the outset, we knew we were operating with a ticking clock here. We knew that based on the deadline attached to the offer sheets that both Dylan Holloway and Philip Broberg signed with the St. Louis Blues, we were going to have a resolution this week. The time was ticking down, but the Oilers still had another couple days to play with here, so it didn't need to get done over the course of this weekend, but it did get done. So at the outset, you knew that you were getting a resolution of some kind over the next few weeks. We still don't have a final conclusion. We still don't know all of the details of how the Oilers are going to handle this. They still have to figure out who's getting mashed, whether it's Broberg, whether it's Holloway, whether it's both. Got to figure out if Evander Kane's going on long-term injured reserve. There are still moving parts to be handled, but the Oilers did take care of some business. So you might ask yourself, well, if they needed money, why did they go out and get a player in Vasily Podkolzin who makes real money? You know, he doesn't make a ton of money. He's relatively inexpensive, and frankly, it's not a big deal that you're going to roster Podkolzin at $1 million per year, at least for the next 2 seasons. But you would think that if the Oilers are in pure sell-off mode, you would have thought they were not in a position to take on a player who's making salary. And we can look at this in a few different ways. Number one, we've known for about a year now that Podkolzin didn't really have a path to the top 9 in Vancouver. This is as close to selling at rock bottom of a stock as you possibly can. This is like when a company ceremonially sells for $1 so they can stay in the company in existence, but the new operator is taking on all the risk and going to put the work in. I think Podkolzin is interesting as far as a gamble, somebody to take a chance on, somebody who needs more opportunity. And in Edmonton, when you look at that bottom 6, you're looking at Corey Perry and Connor Brown. You're looking at Adam Henry. You're looking at old heads. You are looking at guys who are not going to be in the NHL 3, 4, 5 years from now. And we know the Oilers aren't exactly spring chickens. You know, with the status of Holloway and Broberg up in the air, the youngest player on the Oilers roster going into now was Evan Bouchard. I do believe now it's Podkolzin, who's a few months younger. Yeah, Podkolzin's only 23. So the Oilers have another player under the age of 25 that's not just Evan Bouchard. So that should be encouraging for you. And I like taking chances on guys, especially when they're cheap. And this is where a general manager of a good team can really prove their mettle, is finding the right guys to take flyers on and saying, he's good at this. If we give him a little more opportunity, if we give him more responsibility, if we change how he's utilized, we might be able to get more out of him. And then because we took a risk on him, we bought low on him, he's going to give us excess value on that contract. And that's going to help make our roster deeper. It's going to give us an efficient contract. And most importantly, we're getting a useful hockey player. And I have seen flashes of a quality hockey player in Podkolzin. I have watched a lot of the Canucks over the last handful of years, purely out of curiosity because they have so much high-end talent. And Podkolzin has had moments where I wonder why he can't get a bigger look there. And I always felt that the Canucks they were going for the low end of things there when you look at the guys they've employed in their bottom six, when it's guys like Phil DiGiuseppe, who are fine, but they're not really, I don't want to say not serious, but they're not high end bottom six forwards. And Podkolzin is still young enough where it's plausible that there's a little bit more there. Podkolzin's probably not a long-term Oiler. He's probably on the team the next 2-3 years. They probably walk him to unrestricted free agency at 27, 28. And then from there, if he plays well, he can parlay that into more money. But more likely than not, this is a short-term solution to get some youth and to get a cost-effective forward in there. Because you got to remember, with the Oilers needing to match what St. Louis has offered, Dylan Holloway wasn't making a lot of money last year. Dylan Holloway was not expensive. And really quickly, the Oilers are facing the prospect of doubling his money. He was on his entry-level contract last year at $925,000, and the Blues offered him $2.29 million. And look, I think there's a world where Dylan Holloway would have been worth $2.29 million this upcoming season for the Oilers, but it's harder for me to recognize him hitting that number of value, being worth that money as an Oiler than it would be as a Blue. I could see a world where he's on the Blues and he can score 15 or 20 goals, which is easily worth the $2.2 million he's getting paid there. But the more consequential trade, the bigger trade, I should say, the Oilers trading Cody Ceci and a third-round pick for Ty Emberson to the San Jose Sharks, and why the Oilers had to make moves. We've talked about this for a while. Their only movable players, Kulak, Ceci. Evander Kane, the Oilers would like to move, but they're not going to be able to because of the no movement clause, because how bad his contract is, because of the injuries. So they had to pivot. And look, I think Cody Ceci is a really good litmus test for talent evaluation in the NHL, because when you watch, there were glimmers of a quality hockey player in there. His skating for a defenseman is objectively pretty good. The problem is he can't do anything with his skating. His positioning is not great. His ability to move the puck is not great. His physical play is not great. Yeah, he can occasionally score a goal. You know, the joking, not the condescending. What's the word I'm looking for? The tongue-in-cheek, the facetious Mr. Game 7 Cody Ceci. But turning Cody Ceci into effectively a league minimum defenseman, a win. You shedded salary that you needed to get closer to being cap compliant. Now, the Oilers, as we've said a few times in this opening segment, we still got to figure out where they're going as far as Holloway, Broberg, who's getting matched, who isn't. But now you have more money to play with. And Evander Kane almost assuredly is going to go on LTIR now. But we are going to take our first break of the show. And when we come back, we are going to talk about the context of each individual trade, what it likely signals, and a whole lot more coming up next. So be sure to stick around on this edition of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day. We are all driven by the search for better. But when it comes to hiring, the best way to search for a candidate isn't to search at all. Don't search, match with Indeed. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that helps you find quality candidates fast. Ditch the busy work. Use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging so you can connect with candidates faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree. Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to recent Indeed surveys. Indeed leverages over 140 million qualifications and preferences every single day. Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences, so the more you use Indeed, the better it gets. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/lockedon. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Indeed.com/lockedon. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NHL podcast. Locked On NHL provides you with the national perspective on all things NHL each and every day, with national experts and local insights on every team all across the National Hockey League. It's available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So as far as the trades themselves, the Ceci trade is pure cap dump. I do not understand why the Sharks would do this trade. I understand Cody Ceci is a veteran. I understand Cody Ceci is going to be able to play a ton of minutes. I understand from a Sharks perspective that having a veteran who can play a lot, who can take his lumps and kind of absorb some criticism and be not a building block, but someone for the young guys to lean on. That's why you do this if you're the Sharks. There's no hockey reason you're making this trade if you're the Sharks. Cody Ceci might be better than what you currently have on your second or third defensive pair if you're the Sharks. He's not going to win you any hockey games. That Sharks team, even with Macklin Celebrini in the mix, if Will Smith gets in there, even with the guys they've drafted over the last handful of seasons, the guys they've acquired in trades, whether it's pieces from the Devils like Shakir Mukhamadullin or the draft picks they got from the Penguins, nothing the Sharks have done over the last 2 years, none of these trades, these guys are not moving the needle. When you have to overpay to go and get a Tyler Toffoli or an Alex Went, none of those moves are helping you and just doing the Oilers a favor, because that's objectively what this is. All you got to eat Cody Ceci's money was a third-round pick. And look, is the difference between a second-round pick and a third-round pick that different, especially when it's going to be coming from the Oilers, who are going to be picking in the later halves of those rounds if all goes according to plan? Not really, no. The drop-off in value from picks 1 to 20 is bigger than the drop-off from pick 21 to pick 100 if we're talking about it in terms of games played in the NHL, which is generally how you're going to evaluate individual players over comparing draft classes and how good a general manager is. That's typically the barometer we're going to start with, at least. How many games did you get out of the guy? As far as that goes, there's not that big of a difference between the beginning of the second rounds, the middle of the third round. It really comes down to what you see. Maybe the Sharks think their draft operation is quality, that they're going to be able to turn those picks, and because they're going to have so many draft picks year after year after year, they're going to be able to hit on a higher rate of prospects than other teams because they have more than the 7 picks that every team starts with. So I do not understand that trade from a Sharks perspective. You could have gotten more. Every team in the NHL knows the Oilers needed to move Cody Ceci. I don't want to be unfair to Mike Grier because I don't know Mike Grier. But the two transactional moves, I should say, between teams that the Sharks made this summer, acquiring Barclay Goodrow from the Rangers off of waivers and acquiring Cody Ceci, that tells me he's doing his friends a solid. Mike Grier worked with Chris Drury in the Rangers. He worked with Stan Bowman in Chicago. This very clearly is a case of, well, I can do right by my guys, and eventually somebody's going to do right by me. And there is that perception amongst the general manager community that we all look out for each other, that we all know how difficult it is to get into this club. So you don't want to take too much advantage of anybody. You don't want to be unfair. You don't want to take too much in a trade off of anybody, because everybody's trying to keep that shirt on their back. Everybody's trying to keep feeding their family. As insane as that perception is for people who are clearing 7 figures annually, in the case of some general managers, it's $8 or $9 million per year, especially the ones who have dual roles where you're president and general manager. But as far as the CC trade, this does put a lot on the Oilers' back end. We talked about it last week that either way, even if you keep Broberg, you lose Broberg, you are going to put more stress on your defense. Your defense was already the weak link of your team. Your defense was already the part of your team that left the most to be desired. It was your undoing in the Stanley Cup final against the Panthers, who the Panthers defense on an individual basis is not that talented, especially the group they had last year. OEL is fine, Kulikov is fine, Nico Mikkola is fine, Brandon Montour is good, Gus Forsling is legitimately good, and then Aaron Ekblad is fine. That group's not incredible, but they played enough cohesive defense that they weren't a liability, and that was really the difference. Guys like Cody Ceci, Darnell Nurse, liabilities, and they are going into this upcoming season, the Oilers now. You are losing those Cody Ceci games of experience. Whether it's Ty Emberson, whether it's Joshua Brown, whether it's Troy Stetcher, whoever it is that's replacing Vincent Desharnais and Cody Ceci, they are not as established. They are not as proven. That is question mark. That is a concern. I'm not saying that can't work out, but I am saying based on what we understand about how championship Stanley Cup caliber teams are put together, you need experience. Very, very rare for teams that win the Stanley Cup to have more than one rookie in their lineup. And none of those guys are rookies. Ty Emberson has like 20-something, 30-something NHL games played. Joshua Brown, he's been around a while, even if he's not very good. Troy Stetcher has been around. But those archetypes, those types of guys, they are not what the third pair looks like. And the Oilers are more likely than not going to add a defenseman at the trade deadline. I said that at the beginning of the summer, right when we got a look at what their roster was going to look like. As soon as they signed Jeff Skinner and Victor Arvidsson, they went over the cap and very clearly knew they were going to have to do some tweaking with their roster. They knew, hey, if we bring these guys in, and I'm still not faulting Jeff Jackson for doing that. If you were excited on July 1st about adding Jeff Skinner, about adding Victor Arvidsson, you should still be excited. Those are quality hockey players. Yes, the Oilers have leveraged a lot of their future on this season. Your trade-off effectively was Skinner, Arvidsson, and Podkolzin for McLeod, Holloway, and probably not Broberg, but we don't know yet. And then you got to worry about if we're going to put Evander Kane on LTIR to start the season, what are we going to do from a roster perspective when he's healthy? Is he going to be healthy before the playoffs? If he's healthy before the playoffs, are we only going to be able to dress 16 or 17 skaters for a game? There's still quite a bit to be figured out here, but based on these moves, and I'm saying this at 12:24 Eastern Standard Time into Monday morning, it looks like the Oilers are going to match on Broberg and not match on Holloway. That Podkolzin is going to be your Holloway replacement, and you are moving all of these pieces around to accommodate Broberg because you have staked a lot on the premise that he's not just a NHL player. He's an above average, good, maybe even great NHL defenseman. And they're staking a lot on not a big sample. I talked about this with Haley Simon on the crossover edition last week. I said, doesn't it concern you a little bit that you're offering a defenseman who has less than 100 career NHL games, $4.6 million per year, when you see what the going rate is for defensemen with that sample size? And Haley was a little more acceptable to that term because, frankly, the Blues can afford to take risks because they're not really in a window to try and win the Stanley Cup. They're trying to just be competitive. But from an Oilers perspective, if you're sinking 4.6 into Broberg, 9.25 into Nurse, and like 6.5 on Ekholm, it's a lot of money to be tied up in the left side of your defense. But we are going to take one more quick break on this episode of Locked On Oilers, where we've got your team covered every day, and we're going to tackle what we think is going to happen next. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want. It's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions do apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. Thank you to everybody who is hanging out on this Monday edition of Locked On Oilers. Glad that you're starting your week with a bang because, frankly, I wasn't sure how this was all going to play out. My assumption, my hypothesis was they'd find a way to make Holloway work because he's more affordable. There's a more direct path to him getting bigger minutes over the next handful of seasons and giving him that opportunity to kind of bet on himself to play into this offer sheet and then what that subsequent deal looks like. And that Broberg, based on the amount of games he's played, what he's shown you in those games, how sticky or translatable the results he's had in that small sample are over the long range. I'm planning on doing a long form Broberg episode of the show at some point during this week to kind of dive into what the data says about him so far in his NHL career, because a lot of people in the hockey community and the statistics community in particular have pointed out that he got really good goaltending behind him in the playoffs. So even though him and Nurse did end up with good results, it was a byproduct of favorable environmental factors that may or may not be sticky over the course of the long term. So there's definitely cause for skepticism as to just exactly what Broberg is at this point, because we can be honest, he has not played a lot in the NHL, and neither has Holloway. When you are dealing with guys who are 23, 24 years old, who only have 80, 90, 100 NHL games, you got to stop. You got to take a breath and say, well, why? In the Oilers' case, it makes a bit of sense. They've been trying to be serious Stanley Cup contenders for the last few seasons. That's not an environment conducive to bringing guys along slowly, to giving guys opportunities where it's okay to make mistakes. And we've seen that. It is very hard for competitive, for championship caliber teams to integrate those young pieces unless they've already had significant AHL time. When you look at those Lightning teams, the teams that went back to back in 2020 and 2021, they were able to incorporate I almost said Brandon Hagel, and then I caught myself and realized that I meant to say Ross Colton. They were able to develop Ross Colton, played in Syracuse, where Tampa Bay's AHL program has churned out quality NHLer after quality NHLer after quality NHLer. And really quickly, Ross Colton was able to acclimate himself well to that group, whereas the Oilers, they're young guys. I need to see it. And that's the real conundrum of this offer sheet scenario is the Blues can afford to overpay underbaked players that need more seasoning because the Blues have opportunities. You know, the Blues can say, all right, Philip Broberg, you're going to play with Justin Falk 22 minutes a night. You're going to play with Colton Parayko. And either 2 years from now, you're going to be a first pair defenseman that we're building our entire defensive core around, or we were wrong and we burned money, but it doesn't matter because that's the next general manager's problem to figure out what the defense is going to be look like, what the defense is going to look like when Parayko and just Falk and Nick Leddy, those older guys, when they move on, whether it's to another organization or retire, in Nick Leddy's case, you're going to wonder, well, okay, Broberg didn't work out. Okay, we'll keep taking swings. And with Armstrong having a succession plan in place where Alex Steen is set to come in 2 years from now, they can start to ramp that up. And then 2 years from now, that'll be one of the decisions Steen has to make if Philip Broberg is a St. Louis Blue. But based on these trades, based on the way the money is moved around, based on the positional needs of the team, it does seem like, improbably as it seemed last week, that I had said myself that I just couldn't see a way they could make Broberg work. I'm not saying I fully endorse this plan. While, yes, taking Cody Ceci out and putting Philip Broberg in and then putting Ty Emberson in possibly in that last spot to replace Desharnais, it might just be crazy enough to work. You do Kulak with Emberson, you do Broberg and Nurse, you do Ekholm with Bouchard, and then you pray there are no injuries because then you're looking at Troy Stetcher or Josh Brown. And I do think Ty Emberson might be worth a serious look for that 6D spot. I should do a little bit of research, do a deep dive. Maybe I'll try and reach out to some people. He's been in a few organizations. He was a third-round pick of the Arizona Coyotes in 2018. Was it the Ranger organization? Was with the Sharks organization, obviously, where they were just acquired him from. Played under Chris Knobloch in the Rangers AHL affiliate with the Wolfpack. He's bigger. He has decent defensive metric for somebody who was on a god-awful hockey team, which is generally a good barometer of talent. And look, it could be fluky. It could be a one-off, only 30-something NHL games. Maybe that was just he got fortunate for those 30 games, but in a vacuum, you see the vision. They still need to figure out Evander Kane. They still need to figure out maybe what that bottom six forward situation is going to look like. But on paper, going into the 2024-2025 NHL season, the Oilers probably have the best forward group in the entire NHL on paper. On paper doesn't matter, but talent acquisition-wise, the Oilers front office has done its job. There are questions. How are certain pieces going to fit together? Are the Oilers too offense first? Do they have enough defense, both in terms of their forwards' ability to play defense and their literal defense's ability to play defense and their goaltending? How does a team that's probably going to skew a little bit more offense first, a little bit less concerned with defense, how's that going to translate in front of Stuart Skinner, somebody who has been very up and down in his NHL career? He has had really good stretches. He was really good at points in the Cup final. He was really good in the Dallas series. He outplayed Jake Ottinger in the conference final, to be completely frank with you. So the Oilers still have work to do. We will find out in due time when Broberg and Holloway, if they're going to be matched, if one, if both, if neither. Until then, we are going to keep doing our best here on Locked On Oilers to give you all of the best and most actionable and important information you need to stay on top of things. Because if the Oilers are going to ask you to pay 140, 150 Canadian dollars just to get in the building, you should want the best. And to want the best, you got to know what's going on. So before we get out of here, thank you for making Locked On Oilers your first listen today. Now, go check out the Locked On NHL podcast, where the season never ends and provides national expertise with a local perspective. You can find the link to Locked On NHL in the description below on YouTube, so you don't need to search. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Until then, let's go Oilers.